the afternoon, this gets pretty long. And I saw a few people shuffling their feet a little bit, but you've all hung in there really good. And that's a compliment to you. You've stayed focused, and that's critically important. It's great to see so many of you that are fairly young that are with us today. And when I was in 4-H, I was raised on a cattle ranch in the western part of the county out in the Deerhead community. And I'll be 73 this year. So I remember what it was like barely to be your age. But we didn't have an opportunity to, or if we did, we didn't take advantage of it, to see a beef carcass like we see here. How many of you have ever been in a processing plant? Okay, a few of you have, okay? So maybe for some of you, this is the first time to see a side of beef, all right? I'm assuming all of us in here are major consumers of animal protein. In other words, you like beef. You know, I got a sign on the front of my pickup that says, and Carr says, eat beef. Okay? So I'm big time into eating beef. And there's a lot of reasons for eating beef. Number one, it's very, very nutritious. Another reason is it really tastes good, doesn't it?
Yep.
Thank you. And so it's important for us to know a little bit about beef. Now, there's a lot of 4-H'ers in the United States that raise beef cattle, okay, show steers, heifers, and everything, and have never, ever seen an animal they've raised in carcass or meat form. And that's a tragedy, okay? We're very, very lucky to be in Barber County, Harper County, where you can have a processor like we have here at Attica that will allow you to come in and see your beef animal, or your carcass of your beef animal that maybe you had to county fair. And we have several in here that have had that opportunity, and we've done it several times from Barber County Fair. They would harvest the animals here a week later, and then we'd come in and evaluate the beef carcasses. And so you could actually see the carcass, you know, and compare it back to the live animal. So that's all a really important thing. Now, I've got handouts for you. So I'd like for everybody to take one and pass it. And we'll start this over here and take one and pass it, okay? Okay, and as you see this beef carcass at the top, and it has the areas of rib, chuck, shank, the loin, sirloin around, flank, plate, and brisket, okay? And it also shows you some of the retail cuts that come from each of those wholesale cuts. It's kind of important to know that. That gives you a little bit of information. Where does that retail cut come from? What wholesale cut? Because if it comes from the round, that tells me I'm probably going to use maybe a moist heat cookery method to prepare that retail cut. If it comes from the center of the carcass, and I'll show you that here in a second, then that tells me I've got less connective tissue, and probably I'll use a dry heat cookery method, throw it on the charcoal grill, and I should end up with a palatable product as long as I don't overcook it, okay? So knowing the parts of the carcass is very valuable from that standpoint. The other sheet I gave you has a listing of the quality grades, the USDA quality grades that we have in the United States. The flip side has the USDA yield grades. And they're both very important. And as you look at the quality grade, it tells us, all right, these grades should predict the eating quality of the meat in a cooked form, okay? So if you raise beef cattle, you probably know there's a significant price difference between select.
Don't touch. Just remember, don't touch. Okay.
Between select, choice, and prime. Prime being the highest grading level, okay? So that predicts us how juicy and flavorful that meat's going to be if cooked to a common degree of tenderness. The yield grade, I'll be there in a minute, boys. The yield grade predicts the amount of meat that we're going to get out of the carcass. And it's kind of inverse. Oftentimes we think the higher the number, the better. Not so with yield grades. If I got a yield grade 5, that is a fat, light muscle son of a gun. Okay? If I have a yield grade 1 and 2, then I'm going to have a good yield of steaks and roasts from that particular carcass. Okay, y'all with me? So that's kind of the information that we have here. All right, before these guys run out on me over here. This is a beef carcass, okay? This side here says weighs about 385, so double that. We're talking about an animal or carcass that weighed about, what, 770? 770, something like that total. All right, so that would come from a steer or heifer that might have weighed, somewhere in that category of 1250, 1275, somewhere in that vicinity. Okay, now real quick, like it's quiz time, all right? You can look at your sheet if you want to. What's this wholesale cut right here? Somebody? What's it? Round. Okay, all right. What's this one right in here? Sirloin? Loin? What's this right in here?
Rib.
Rib? What's this big thing here?
Shuck.
Shuck. You guys are hot. Okay? Now, if I turn this around, what would this be right in this area here?
Flank.
Flank? Flank? Does anybody like Mexican cuisine?
I've never tried it.
You've never tried Mexican food?
I've had Mexican
Have you?
food.
Okay. Have you ever had a fajita? Okay. That's the most expensive thing on the menu, so you may not have. But a fajita comes from this flank muscle right here. Okay. Now, anybody tell me what this? How much? Plate. Okay. And what's this right down in here?
Brisket.
Okay. Is that really important this Sunday? What happens this Sunday?
Church.
Church, I like that. Okay, you're exactly right, young man. Starts with wearing green. Are you Irish? St. Patty's Day. St. Patrick's Day, isn't it Sunday?
No. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
isn't it, or am I out to lunch? I'm right? Okay. Now, what do you eat on St. Patrick's Day?
meat.
Corned beef. Where's corned beef come from?
Meat.
Well, yeah, it's meat, it's beef. Which one of these wholesale cuts?
Brisket.
The brisket. Very good. Okay, you're on your money. Would you do me a favor? Could you hold that saw just like that? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now, God made beef cattle with 13 ribs. Okay? And in the meat industry, we separate the hind quarter from the forequarter between the 12th and 13th rib. Okay? And so from here up, it's called the hind quarter, from here down, the forequarter. Now, we're going to rib this and expose the ribeye muscle so we can see the size of it, so we can evaluate the quality, which is going to be primarily determined by the amount of marbling, that type of thing, okay? So we're going to come down, and I use a kind of a shortcut method. I count down the lumbar vertebrae, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. If I cut between the 7th and the half lumbar vertebrae, that means I'll be between the 12th and 13th rib if I counted correctly, okay? So we're going to try to do that. Careful here so I don't catch you. My problem's I'm right-handed. This happens to be the right side of the carcass, so I've got to rib it with my right in reverse order. So I'm going to go like this. I'm a lot better ribbing a cattle on the left than I am the right. Okay, and this exposes the ribeye right here. Now, you can take a quick look. Looks like a pretty nice ribeye that's got some pretty nice marbling in it. Okay, so what we do in a grading system is that if you go to a large processing plant, thank you very much, the cattle will be ribbed, and they'll go up and down a chain for about 10 to 15 minutes. And it allows the ribeye to brighten up so that as it passes the broad lights of Broadway, federal grader can get in there and see all the marbling that he or she can possibly see. And then they call that cattle, whether it's prime, choice, select, whatever it might be, okay? But there's what they call a bloom time. And that's for this meat to brighten up with the oxygen that we have, all right? Now, let me just lay this right here. If you have to stay. Don't move. Cattle, as they go through the processing thing here, are split right down the back. And one of the aspects of quality grading, one aspect is maturity, the other is marbling, okay? All right, so this cattle's running around. Do you have tags? This is, I can actually say, you probably do say, yes, I do have tags that tell you the birth date. All right, you may have a tag in the ear, I don't know if you do or not. But generally, just look at the live animal, we have no earthly idea how old that animal is, do we? No. They don't have a big neon sign that says I'm a year old. So, we've got this animal split here. We have no earthly idea when this sucker was born, do we? So we've got to look at indicators that predict how old the carcass might be. And so to do that, we split the animal and we evaluate the spinal processes that are along the back of the animal, okay? Now, if I take you and split you in half, okay, you're going to have a whole lot of white cartilage along your spinal process. Very much like this cattle right here. This is a very young cattle. See the caps here, the white? Look at the white down the thoracic vertebrae, okay? So he's young. You'd be young. All right, now you split me down the middle, and I'm going to have, see how old this bone is out here? That's the way mine would be all the way out to the tips, okay? And I'd be completely solid in here. The rib bones, see how red those rib bones are? They're beautiful, nice and youthful. Mine would be flat and white. Look old, 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 okay? That's a really important part of the grading, of quality grading. This is A. So what that tells me with A maturity, all the grading is primarily due to the amount of marbling that I see in the ribeye of the cattle, okay? Now, it just takes some experience. Our federal graders have marbling pictures which they use to standardize small, modest, moderate, slightly abundant, moderately abundant, abundant amount of marbling. I was fortunate enough to be on the committee that developed those marbling pictures many, many, many years ago, okay? And so with this experience, you learn what a small amount of marbling should look like, okay? This cattle right here is probably what I would call, in a percentage standpoint, about a small 80 in marbling level, which means it would qualify for the low choice grade, okay? And those of our 4-H'ers that are on our meats judging team in Barber County, hopefully they get to where they can recognize how much marbling it takes to go select, choice, or prime, that type of thing. So this cattle here would grade low choice, and if it sets out here a little bit longer, that marbling might become more apparent and actually might slip into the modest range, which would be average choice. If, in fact, it was black, actually 51% black, and a modest amount of marbling, it qualifies for the Certified Angus Beef Program, the CAB program. Some of you might be into that program if you're feeding cattle. And of course, that allows you to make a little bit more money because there's a premium given for certified Angus beef compared to what you would have if it were graded low choice. Now, the other thing is called yield grading. Okay, and we said that the numbers go 1 to 5. In our intercollegiate, in FFA, they have yield grading, and at the intercollegiate level, you have to call a cattle to the nearest tenth of a yield grade. In FFA, it's to the nearest third of a grade, okay? How do we do that? There's 4 factors that come into play. One is fat. Remember, when you're evaluating meat or meat products, outside fat, subcutaneous fat is a dirty word. Okay, fat is not good. Now, where do we measure fat on a beef carcass? Well, it's measured 3/4 of the distance from the bottom of the ribeye. This is the longissimus dorsi right here, and we'd measure this cattle here, and he measured, about 6/10. Now, see, there's some of the challenges that come into grading. You can see that there is a little bit of a knife mark right there, just about where you want to measure it. So then you got to look at the cattle and say, well, do I need to adjust this initial fat thickness here up or down with the amount of fat that we see externally? And that takes some experience in knowing how to do that. This cattle, in my opinion, would have about 6/10 of an inch of fat on him. Okay? Now, today Justin was talking about, what did he say you had to have for your steer to be right for the county fair? Remember what condition score? Come on.
7.
No, well, yeah, 6 to 7, didn't he? 6 to 7, okay? And I would say at a county fair, if I'm judging a live show, I'd want that cattle to handle what I think about 4/10 to 5/10 to have the amount of marbling I might need if I marketed that cattle. Okay, this has got a little bit more than that, but not bad. Okay, now, we said the cattle weighed what? 780? 770? 775? Okay, that requires, according to our USDA, they have what they call average muscling per carcass weight. 600-pound carcass, if it's average muscle, should be 11.0. Okay, this cattle right here should be sitting around a 13.1 if he's average muscling. Now, just looking at him, he doesn't have a tremendously plump and bulging round, but he does have some thickness down through here. And just looking at this ribeye, I'm going to say he's pretty decent size. I think he's going to beat 13.1. Now, how do I measure this? Well, I take this grid. Each one of these dots is 1/10 of a square inch. And so I simply count the dots. Now, in 4-H meat judging and intercollegiate meat judging, we don't give the kids a grid. They got to look at it and estimate it. And that's the most challenging aspect of meat judging, is becoming accurate at estimating ribeye size, okay? If you give me a second here, I'm going to quickly calculate this, count it up, and we'll just see how big this one is. Would you believe he's a 13.0? So right at where he requires. Right at where he requires. So with the 6/10 fat, we have a prelim of a 3.5 on the yield grade. The next thing we got to do is look at the internal fat. Now there's three fat areas that we got to be concerned about. The external fat, which is called subcutaneous fat. We already measured it, we adjusted it, called it a 3.5, okay? The other fat parameter is internal fat. This is the pelvic region, so we look to see if there's any fat in the pelvic area. Then we have the fat. Anybody have any idea what this right here is? What'd you say?
Some of the stomach.
Stomach. Nope, that stomach is long gone. It better be anyway. Okay. Kidney. That's a beef kidney. This looks like a cluster of grapes, doesn't it? A little on the steroids maybe, but a cluster of grapes. Okay. And this is the fat that surrounds the kidney, so it's called kidney fat. And then down in this chest area, you would oftentimes have some fat in this area which surrounds the heart. So in other words, the internal fat surrounds your vital organs. Okay? And so you estimate this. This cattle doesn't have too much. I'd call it about a 2% kidney. And so I end up minusing my yield grade about 3/10. And so the overall yield grade for this cattle would be a 3.2. Okay, moving to a yield grade 2. All right? 3.2, low choice, very, very desirable carcass as far as, you know, this baby ought to eat really nice. I don't know who it belongs to, but if they let him hang for a little bit, beautiful steaks, it's going to eat very, very nice. So a low choice, yield grade 2, and that is kind of, that might be somewhat pretty typical for our cattle industry. In recent years, the percentage of cattle grading prime in the United States has gone up from about 2% to 4.5%. You see more prime in the retail cases today. We are real fortunate in Medicine Lodge to have a grocery store that does a great job with meat. And they've had prime steaks routinely on sale for about $8 a pound. And that's like stealing, okay? And so really, prime has become more prevalent. You go to a high-dollar steakhouse, you know, and they serve prime. Do you pay quite a bit for that filet mignon or ribeye? Yeah, you know, you're looking at $25, $30, $35, $40 a plate, okay? So quality grading is important, but so is the yield of meat that you get as you look at this, okay? Now, I know we're about out of time here, but keep in mind, I can have the best meat in the world. This plant can do the best job in the world of processing it, packaging it, aging it, you know, and all of that. Get it home, and you can absolutely destroy that retail cut by the way you prepare it. Okay?